Okay, great. And so the talk title is a little bit misleading because I don't actually think there's a number, and I think that a lot of people do. They look for a number like is 5,000 full nodes is about how many we have today, or like 6,000, and people think that they ask like, is that a good number? And I actually feel like that's really the wrong way to be looking at the role of full nodes in the ecosystem. But I'll dive into that more. So the talk today is really about full nodes. I was already given an introduction, so I'll just skip that. But I'm David Vorick, and I've been with Bitcoin since 2011. And I do a bunch of stuff. Okay, cool. So just as a refresher for what full nodes do, full nodes validate transactions on the Bitcoin network. And so Bitcoin has this like longest chain rule, where the chain with the most work in it is the chain that everybody follows, except this chain also has to follow all of the rules that the network has. And so the full nodes are the ones who check that the chain follows the rules, and if a chain doesn't follow the rules, it doesn't matter how much hash rate is behind it, that chain is ignored, and we don't use it. And so it is only the full nodes on the network that check this. And yeah, so that's an important part of the ecosystem. SPV nodes don't check the rules, and so they're faster. They download all the headers. They make sure that they are on the chain with the most work, but they don't actually check that the chain with the most work is legal or is valid. And so they're sort of making a gamble that if a miner produces an invalid block, the rest of the ecosystem will sort of detect the invalid block and reject it and route around it. And the SPV nodes just blindly have faith in the broader network to like do this process that makes sure that the longest chain is always valid. But they don't actually know. They're just assuming that the broader network is going to keep them safe. So of course, if you don't have any full nodes at all, everybody's doing SPV, you lose this rule enforcement, and you give the miners the ability to do whatever they want, which of course is bad. I don't really need this slide. But basically, if people can spend each other's money, if miners can poof money out of nowhere, you have a useless system. So it's really important that you have rules, and full nodes are the only ones that are enforcing the rules. So full nodes are really important to the Bitcoin network. Okay, so now we're going to switch to a little bit more new stuff, which is a topic on network upgrades. And when I say upgrade, what I really mean is like a block that enforces different rules than what most people are familiar with. So I'm going to say, instead of invalid blocks, we're going to say an attempted upgrade. When you have an invalid block, really, it's just a block that follows different rules. And so to say invalid doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the context of an entire network. Because even on the Bitcoin network today, we have Bitcoin core nodes, which follow one set of rules, and then we have Bitcoin Unlimited nodes that follow a different set of rules. And so to say a block is invalid to the whole network, it could be valid to half of it. And so really, if you have a block that is following different rules, you can't say that it's invalid to the whole network, because there might be nodes that think it's a valid block. So really, it's an attempted upgrade on the coin. And for this talk, upgrade means hard fork. So if you want, a word for soft fork, it would be like patch or something, because soft forks don't actually change the rules. They just are more creative about how they use the rules. So when you have an attempted upgrade, there are really three things that happen. Basically, you split the chain into two pieces, and either the attempted upgrade can fail, so this would be an unsuccessful upgrade, and the block gets rejected, the chain dies, nobody's like using the coins, and the old rules are the longest chain and the only ones that get used. Another thing that could happen is that both sides live, and so you have miners on each side, the chain is getting accepted, there are full nodes on each side who are doing payments, and so I'm going to call that like a partially successful upgrade. And then finally, there's like a fully successful upgrade where the old rule set dies entirely, and the new rule set is the one that has the longest chain and essentially the only chain with people accepting it. So some quick examples. A couple, I guess, weeks ago now, a Bitcoin Unlimited node mined a block that was 1,023 bytes. This is an attempted upgrade. Their standard rule set says blocks can only be 1,000,000 bytes. We have some extra bytes at the end. And essentially what happened was the miners rejected this block. There was it essentially got orphaned. There's a current long chain, and nobody is mining on top of the block. Nobody's sending transactions on top of this chain. So it's an attempted upgrade that just that failed. It's only one block long. So a successful partial upgrade would be the Ethereum Classic and Ethereum hard fork split. When they went and addressed the DAO attack, they changed the rules in a way that was incompatible with old nodes, and so you had nodes that accepted the new rules, and you had hash rate that the majority hash rate followed the new rules, but you still had this set of old rules where nodes continued to enforce them, continued to mine them, continued to accept transactions based off of these old rules. And so this is a partial upgrade, or as it's been called, I think, a coin split, where now you have two live, healthy ecosystems. One of them's a lot bigger than the other, but people who want to use the old Ethereum rules and stick with the DAO disaster, and they want to live with it, that chain is alive and exists, and you can go use it today. And then finally, successful upgrades following the DAO hard fork. Ethereum hard forked, I think, 3 more times. And these did not result in coin splits. Everybody upgraded. The old code for each of the 3 hard forks died entirely. And so there's only, there's the Ethereum Classic DAO side, and then there's the hard fork moved on side. And even though they hard forked 3 or 4 times, this only resulted in one final chain. So I would call these completely successful upgrades. The network sort of embraced them, and nobody resisted it. Okay, so what goes into deciding whether or not an upgrade attempt is successful? And you could say that some sort of upgrade attempts could be blocked by miners. If no one is mining on a chain, then the miners can kill it, even if there's interest in the chain. But really, if you want to push an upgrade to the network and you want to disregard the miners, you can just do something like change the proof of work, change the header format, and you can sort of upgrade without the consent of the miners. So what it really boils down to is the full nodes. The question is, are people accepting money on this new set of rules or on the old set of rules? And if I want to participate in a set of rules on a network, are there other people for me to participate with? Is there an ecosystem or a community? And the full nodes are the only ones who have full visibility of the rule set and full visibility of compliance. And so they are ultimately the ones who decide whether or not an upgrade is going to be successful and accepted, or maybe partially successful, or whether it's going to fail altogether. So that's sort of one of the central points of the talk, is that if you're not running a full node, sort of your opinion on whether or not you like a hard fork is less relevant, because ultimately if you're not validating the rules, someone gives you a transaction following different rule set, you don't have a way to detect that, and you don't know, and so you actually can't weigh in on the outcome of an attempted hard fork or an attempted upgrade. And so sort of an add-on to this is that if there is money to be made mining a block, someone's going to mine this. So even if you live in an ecosystem where the miners are super hostile to a fork that the users want, if the users execute this hard fork and they are using the coin and the coin has value, someone's going to go and pick up that mining reward. And so it might not be the same hash rate and it might not be the same people, but if there's user energy behind a certain coin, there's monetary reward and someone's going to go and get it. So essentially, miners don't really have power to cut off hard forks. Really, it comes down to full nodes being, actively trading a coin or actively accepting payments on a certain coin. Yeah. Okay, so SPV nodes depend on full nodes. If there's a hard fork and you're running an SPV node, you're dependent on other full nodes in the ecosystem to tell you whether or not transactions are valid. You're sort of depending on them to represent you in your opinion in the outcome of the hard fork. And if there are malicious full nodes out there, they may tell you that they're on one side of the hard fork and they're actually on the other side of the hard fork. As an SPV node, there's not really an easy way for you to tell. And so generally speaking, it's probably safe to assume that you'll be able to find trustworthy parties to sort of engage with, but you are depending on those parties being there. And so in the event of like a really hostile hard fork, or like a really bitter hard fork where one side of the ecosystem is going one way and doesn't want the other side of the ecosystem to go another way, SPV nodes are more or less left out to dry. They can't be certain that they are on the side of the fork that they support. I think I've said this enough times. So basically, you can think of full nodes as analogous to like representation in a democracy. It's sort of like voting. If there's a contentious change being proposed to the network and you are able to run a full node, you can sort of put your like stick in the stand and in the sand and say, I will not accept, coins from chains that have 8 megabyte blocks or whatever. And that's sort of an economic weight. When full nodes choose not to participate in a certain chain, that reduces the value of a coin. And if we bring it up to sort of like a more grand level, and we take a payment processor like BitPay, if BitPay decides, firmly that they're going to be on one side or another of a fork, that's going to have a huge impact on the value of the coins on either side of those forks. And so BitPay has this big representation, and when they vote, they're actually going to impact the value of the coin because that influences where the coin can be spent and what the coin is useful for. And so this is sort of an aristocratic arrangement where if you are a person who accepts, one transaction a month, it's for a low dollar value. It's not that important to the ecosystem which side of the fork you are on. If you're a giant, exchange like Coinbase, your weight means a lot more. And so in this case, like full node number is not as relevant as economic participation, the amount of economic participation of the full nodes. Okay, so coercive upgrades is where like it gets really important to have full nodes. If we get a situation where Coinbase and BitPay and the miners and every major, I guess payment hub in the Bitcoin ecosystem all agree on a change that the users in general feel is hostile to them, the users, if they aren't running full nodes, they can be dragged along anyway. If you aren't running a full node and your infrastructure decides to pick an upgrade, you don't have any recourse, and there's no way for you to be able to sort of catch up. And this is a much bigger problem if you're unable to run a full node because it's too expensive. So today, a lot of us, I'm guessing, don't run full nodes. But in the event of turmoil, it's pretty easy for us to spin up a full node and sort of make sure that we're on the side of the fork that we want to be. If the block size was, say 200 megabytes, and you need $1,000 a month of infrastructure to participate in the chain, and you see all these like big payment processors deciding a change that you don't like, that's just too bad. You've sort of lost control. So this is the next like major point of the talk, which is if full nodes are expensive to run, only people who are like capable of running nodes really have any say in what happens in a contentious upgrade. And so in the case of Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, running an Ethereum node, it was simple enough that when the major players in the Ethereum ecosystem said, yes, we're going to do this hard fork, and we all agree with the hard fork, there was wiggle room for the smaller players to say, no, we disagree, and we're going to have a minority coin. If full nodes are too expensive, they likely wouldn't have been able to say that, because if there's only one or two major full nodes, then then whatever they say is what's going to happen. And so this expands even if they're like, I think this is the next slide. So this is why I say the correct number of full nodes is not really a number. If only more powerful, like businesses or like payment processors or bigger institutions are able to run full nodes, it doesn't matter if 100,000 of them exist, because institutions have different goals and priorities than individual users. And so you are being represented by people who have different goals than you. And so the people who are deciding how the coin progresses in the ecosystem are not you. So the correct number of full nodes, in my opinion, is, can I run one? Then yes, then they're, I'm good and I don't have to worry about it. And Coinbase never has to worry about the number of full nodes. They can run one, and if they disagree with something, they can, they'll be able to run a full node. So they don't actually have to worry about it because they can run full nodes. At a personal level, you should feel the same way. If you're able to run a full node, you don't have to worry about it. But if it's too expensive for you to run a full node, then you should probably be complaining. And again, this doesn't mean that you have to run a full node all the time to participate. It's really like a contingency plan. If things go wrong, am I going to be motivated enough to like actually, run a full node to make sure that my opinion on things matters and that my economic weight is being applied in the way that I would like it to be. Okay, so that's the major point of this talk, is that full nodes are super important, and you really should care if you can run a full node. And the fact that there are 6,000 full nodes out there that aren't you shouldn't bring you all that much confidence, because they might not have the same ideas as you about which way the currency should be going. And so in contentious times like the block size debate, you should be conscious of the fact that you don't matter unless you're running a full node. I think I glossed over the point, but often you can find someone to represent you, right? And so maybe I'll just connect to full nodes that have the same ideology as me. But if they're trying to represent, 100,000 users, they may not represent you super well. And if you're running a full node, you can represent yourself, essentially perfectly, because you are yourself. Okay, so if we're going to pick a number to help the scaling discussion along and figure out, how big should blocks be? When is it okay to make full nodes more expensive? I think it really makes sense to look at the transaction price, because there are two ways that people are priced out of the Bitcoin ecosystem. The first is that full nodes become too expensive to run. If you can't run the ecosystem, you become like a guest of the people who can run full nodes. And so you're sort of participating, but not really. Then the second way is if transactions become too expensive for you to use, you get priced out. And it doesn't matter if you can run a full node. If it costs $500 to send a transaction, then Bitcoin's not useful to you anyway. So the ideal validation cost for a full node is where the transaction price sort of meets the full node cost in terms of people being priced out. You want people to be priced out right at the same time. And so if transaction fees are super high, maybe it makes sense to increase the full node cost. If full node cost is super high, then you should probably limit the throughput of the network to make full nodes easier to run. Okay, and then this is just sort of a personal opinion. or a side tangent. But really, when it comes to decentralization and when it comes to looking at transaction fees, you shouldn't be looking at, you know, a 50 cents fee and saying, oh man, coffee doesn't make sense to buy anymore. So my argument here is that a 50-cent fee really is not that high, because when we're talking about Bitcoin, we want to be protecting against censorship, against hyperinflation, and against, you know, government seizure, asset seizure. That's not so much a problem in the U.S., but if you're in Greece, if you're in Venezuela, or if you're in an unstable government, or, you know, if something happens that destabilizes the U.S., you want to be immune from political garbage that threatens your money. And if your, you know, $3 cup of coffee is victim to, you know, a 10,000% hyperinflation, that's not so bad compared to, you know, your life savings becoming victim to 10,000% hyperinflation. So I would advocate that right now full nodes are too expensive, and really, in dollar terms, the size of the full node, 100 gigabytes, I think, or in dollar terms, that's not the biggest problem. That's like $2. And other parts of running a full node are more expensive than $2. However, in psychological terms, I think this is probably our biggest bottleneck right now. When we're talking about the everyday user deciding whether or not to run a full node, they look at their computer, they're like, oh, I have 500 gigabytes. I have a 500 gigabyte hard drive. 250 that is in use, you know, operating system, media, video games, whatever. If I run a Bitcoin full node, I'm losing half of my remaining space. And so even though that's only $2 of storage, that's a massive psychological barrier. And when I wrote this, I had not been thinking about pruned nodes, so I'm not actually sure how pruned nodes adjust the equation. But in terms of like unpruned nodes, I definitely think that regardless of the dollar cost of running a full node, it's the 100 gigabytes right now that's like the biggest problem facing us. Okay, cool. So in conclusion, full nodes are really important, and you should care that you're able to run a full node. And I think that just in the broad ecosystem, I think people tend to undervalue full nodes by a lot. And so that's why today I chose to talk about it, because I feel like it's really important that people protect like the sanctity of full nodes and appreciate how much full nodes do to keep the system decentralized and out of control of parties who may have different ideas about what's best than you do. Thank you.